welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Dr. Rocco Martino, and this book deals with the resurrection, a criminal investigation of the mysterious disappearance of the body of the crucified criminal Jesus of Nazareth. Great to have you here, Doctor.
Hi, Doug.
First time I think you've been on EWTN television.
Yes, it is.
But this is one of the first books really we've had a chance to work with, because most of the time, though you're a author who's written many, many works, most of them have not been in this particular field, right?
No, they're on rather technical subjects.
Right. Well, again, your background, I guess we could call you a rocket scientist, right?
Yes. And you can call me Rocky, too. But
okay, Rocky. Did that come from Rocco or rocket scientist?
I think it probably came from both.
A little
My
bit
father
of both.
called me Rocky when I was growing up.
Right, and you worked on a lot of the work that related to, what, Mercury and Gemini and a lot of the programs, Apollo. Those of us of my age bracket would certainly remember quite vividly.
And mine.
And, okay, good. Now, somehow you wandered around and we ended up with a book on the resurrection. Now, this is the second book that would be considered as a novel for you. You also did a novel having to do with, what, 9/11?
Yeah, it was a terrorist novel with a lot of tension in terms of an attack on the United States in memory of the 9/11 attack.
Okay.
So it's called the Anniversary Attack.
Well, let me ask you about this. What made you decide to move into writing novels versus writing more technical material?
The original terrorist novel came as a fun thing to do. Mm-hmm. I like sort of tension books, murder mysteries, things of that nature. But this particular book came because one of our sons, Paul, said to me, "Dad, you write a lot of books. Why don't you write a definitive book on the resurrection?" I see, okay. So I thought about it, and I could have taken a nonfiction version, but who would read nonfiction if you, there's so many. So I thought of a novel, and then it became a case of doing a lot of research. And how could I portray a novel about the resurrection? And it isn't so much the resurrection as some of the doubts and some of the counter attacks as to whether the resurrection really occurred.
Yeah, like the Passover plot and things like that.
The Passover plot, and whether the body was stolen or not stolen, whether the body even died. So that I studied the history of the time and studied the scriptures and studied some of the commentaries. And it came down to what was required was a docudrama, so to speak. So it isn't so much a novel as
it reads like a teleplay.
It's
really.
a teleplay.
Right.
And what I did is I took the events, the episodic events that you have in the scriptures, and connected them. And the connection was the evidence. What is the evidence? So
it is like a detective story,
it's a detective
which is the kind
story,
of things you like.
And this revolves around a man called Quintis Gaius Caesar, an invented character, but perhaps that character really existed. If you think about it, about that time, there was a great deal of interest on the part of the Roman emperor. There was peace and stability with Augustine and with Tiberius, so that there was a great desire to maintain the status quo. And the status quo was to take care of the boundaries, so that if when anything occurred at any of the territories fronting the boundaries of the Roman Empire, there was a great deal of interest. So this story centers on the fact that the emperor is concerned about this turmoil existing in Judea. So he sends this highly placed man, Quintis, who is the deputy head of the Praetorian Guard and a very powerful figure.
Right, and you talk of even historically how Tiberius really consolidated power through establishing the whole Praetorian Guard.
That's right.
Right, getting
so
control of it.
So this would be an important official as the deputy head of the Praetorian Guard.
Now the head was Macro?
Macro, yes.
Right.
And that was, he was the replacement of a man who Tiberius had executed, the original head of the Praetorian Guard, Suetonius. So that Quintus goes to Judea, and his first interview is with Saul, Paul of
Right, that's the
Tarsus.
first one. He meets him on the way there,
Meets
right?
on the way.
Okay.
And then the objective is to find definitively what really happened. In other words, did the body die? Was there death? Why was there an execution? Why was there a crucifixion? What was the role played by Caiaphas, the role played by Pontius Pilate?
Right.
So in endeavoring to discover this, he has the aid of 100 legionaries and 3 centurions.
Okay.
So that the entire country, all of Judea, is scoured and searching for evidence. how did this occur? And the evidence comes from the interviews with Paul, with Peter, with Mary, Mary Magdalene.
What's interesting is because the interviews with Saul, not with Paul.
That's right.
It's the same person, but it's a different part of his life, right?
And at that time, he was a dedicated zealot who wanted to stamp out this heresy, this nascent force that was a threat to the status quo.
Right.
But even then, what I interjected was a certain doubt, because Paul was a very good man. While he was zealous and dedicated to his cause, he was still a very thinking person. And how could a man who was doing such good as Jesus still be espousing a cause that would be difficult? But Paul was motivated by the fact of his great belief and support of the Jewish law, the mitzvot, which controlled all aspects of life within that religious.
Right, and you capture the idea that Paul was a fearless personality. You talk about, as Quintis wrote up, he too was puzzled. The man had no fear and had the bearing of one used to command himself. And of course, Saul also had the ability, because he was a Roman citizen, so he had certain levels of protection.
He was also very highly educated.
Right.
He'd studied under Gamaliel, he was a Pharisee.
Yeah, one of the two great teachers,
So that Paul is a very important figure, as we know, but from the point of view that he did a complete reversal from being zealous against to being zealous in favor. So that the interview with Paul, I think, was one of the most important things that put this doubt into the mind of Quintis in terms of maybe there is something here that's much more than a minor turmoil.
Right, which he was, they weren't sure. And he'd say, Saul's face clouded over and he spat on the ground after Quintis said something about Jesus being a king. That scoundrel blasphemed. He misled many with his magic and trickery. He deserved to be put to death. I'm commissioned by the Sanhedrin, the priests of the temple, to search out all his followers, arrest them. If they do not, then they have to be stoned.
Right. So this is a sort of starting point and sets the stage. Then when Quintis arrives in Judea, he establishes his method of operation and makes arrangements with the head of the Roman garrison in Judea. And there is an absence. I had to, in a sense, set an absence of Pontius Pilate, because I didn't want Pontius Pilate to come onto the scene too soon.
You had him up in Syria?
That's right. So I had him up in Syria because at that time he reported to the governor of Syria.
Well, that's interesting too, because a lot of people, and maybe based more on kind of movies and things like that, you always had the impression that he reported like directly to the emperor, not that there was someone else local.
He was really a sub-governor. He was a procurator. He was not a true governor in the sense of a province. So that I could get Pontius Pilate out of the way until I could set some of the stage in terms of some of the
he shows up later.
He shows up later.
Right.
So the important thing is then for Quintis to get the evidence, and he, in his mind, it was very clear. First of all, did Jesus die? Was there really a death? Was he drugged? Was he unconscious and placed in a tomb so that he could just walk out of the tomb? So it was verified through Longinus and that the spear pierced his heart.
Right, because he went first to the barracks and actually was talking to the Roman legionnaires there, right?
That's right.
That's how you have it laid out.
His first set of evidence was, did Jesus die? So once that was determined from a lot of interviews and from first-hand interviews with the man who actually controlled the execution.
Right, he was in charge of the execution. You say the centurion once again paused. He said, "How do you know he was truly dead?" asked Quintis. The centurion once again paused and struggled to continue. His face held the deep anguish of spirit as he said, "I pierced his side with a lance, and blood and water came out, so I knew he was dead. My mission was accomplished. We did not break his leg since it was unnecessary."
That's right.
So how you establish he was dead.
So he was dead.
Right.
The next thing,
which was one of the concerns that Quintis had, that maybe he had been drugged, he really wasn't dead. Right.
And some of the controversy, some of the counters to the fact of the resurrection was that he really didn't die, that there was no such thing as the crucifixion, that it was just pumped up. There was also some thought that there was no tomb.
Right.
And so I had to counter that there was a tomb. And Jesus was put into the tomb, and his tomb was sealed. So then the tomb had to be investigated. Was there another exit? Was there a way for people to get into it because there was a guard placed in front of the tomb?
Yeah, some sort of back door or trap door
was
or
there
some
a back
other way
door?
out. Right.
So it had to be established there was no back door.
Right.
So it comes down to, there's the tomb. There are guards in front of it who are placed there because of the controversy.
Yeah, it sounds like there was actually quite a number of guards, actually, from at least the description in here.
The scriptures are sort of moot in terms of
Right.
were they temple guards or were they Roman guards?
Right.
So that there's a controversy or discussion in terms of what kind of guards were there. But if you think about it, the Romans were not going to take responsibility with temple guards because they really didn't trust Caiaphas anyway.
Right.
So the assumption is made they're Roman guards.
Because clearly Pilate, while there was washing of hands, clearly understood that this was something that was
political.
wanted.
That's right.
Right.
And the interview with Caiaphas and the interview with Pontius Pilate become very important. The interview with Pontius Pilate, when it finally occurs, by that time he has enough evidence of the miracles that something was really going on. He also had investigated the fact that the tomb had no separate entrance, that the body was dead, but the body disappeared. So the question is, what happened?
What happened to the body?
So
right?
there's an interview with Peter in terms of, and the apostles, was the body stolen by the apostles? Well, the apostles were petrified. They were so frightened and so intimidated by Caiaphas and by the manner of the passion that most of them hid. They were afraid of being executed themselves. They were afraid of being arrested. So that you couldn't really think in terms of these men who were so fearful having the courage to overcome the guards, go in and steal the body. So that was highly improbable. Then it comes down to, did the body come, if it wasn't dead, if it was drugged, it could walk out. That was not, it was proven not to be so. It comes down to what really happened. The only possibility was that the body walked out itself.
Right.
So the resurrection then had to be a fact. And Quintis comes to the conclusion that with the guards and with all of the evidence that the body did walk out, that there was a resurrection. Therefore, in his mind, and there was no problem in the Roman mind with multiple gods, that there was a divinity here.
Right.
So it was no startling to say that, startling conclusion that this was a divine nature.
Right.
Now it comes down to
because he actually questions one of the was it Longinus about, do you believe in this Messiah? Don't you believe in the Roman gods?
Right.
So some of these people, and Jarius is one of the people he talks to about.
That's right.
So he talks to a lot of the people closer to that he feels he could trust, at least at some level, to reinforce the idea of the miracles, right?
The idea of a divinity from a Roman perspective was not foreign, because the Romans were quite willing to accept that there is a divine nature in a human person. They were deifying quite a few of their great figures, the emperors. It comes down to, why did the execution occur? And this is one of the key parts of the book, in terms of what was the role of Pontius Pilate. Was Pontius Pilate really a person who really thought of Jesus as being innocent and was washing his hands of it? But Pontius Pilate, if you really study it, was a very cruel man, a very insecure man. And therefore he went along with the manipulation by him of Caiaphas, the high priest, because the high priest was concerned essentially of the rising power of Jesus. So he looked upon this as a threat to the status quo.
And his goal was to maintain order.
Maintain order, maintain the status quo. Any threat, any change to the status quo had to be abolished. Better to destroy one than to destroy a nation, is the
Right, and in fact, Tiberius's concern wasn't so much that he did that, but that in doing that, he might cause more trouble. Right?
That's right. And the other part of Tiberius' concern is that he couldn't have a governor who could be manipulated by the high priest of a religious sect.
Right, and even when he met with Saul admitted that clearly Jesus was popular with the crowd, but unpopular.
Unpopular with the status quo. With the high priest and the Pharisees, and really, in a sense, unknown to the Roman commanders, to the procurator, until it was called to his attention by Caiaphas, who engineered all of this after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem by Jesus, which was the real alarm signal.
Well, you also talk about the key factor for them also was the money changer experience in the temple.
The money changers was the final, in a sense, the final straw.
Right.
And that did it, because The rumors were, and the stories were coming back of this rising popularity of this preacher as he went into the countryside. Then Palm Sunday, the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, the attack on the money changers. This not only was a threat to the power base, but was also a threat to the financial base. So as a result, the decision is made, had to go.
Something had to happen.
So something had to happen.
In chapter 5, when you were talking about, you jumped to when he was talking to Peter, you say Quintis had expected that Peter would appear defeated and fearful. He was surprised at the actual demeanor of Peter. This was no fearful man, no coward.
This is after Pentecost.
Right.
And this is one of the great proofs of the fact of the resurrection did occur. That here you had a group of fearful men. Peter, who with all of his courage and everything else did deny Christ 3 times, did not come to the crucifixion, was not at the cross. John was, Peter wasn't. And the other apostles were conspicuous by their absence. They were in hiding. So that you have a complete reversal from men who were in hiding and fearful for their lives, now coming forth and saying,
changed.
Something changed.
There was some experience
So
or something.
what was it?
Yeah, right.
Something changed. And the change was Pentecost, of course, the Holy Spirit. But suddenly, and one of the great scenes in a sense in putting it together, is Peter saying, well, are you going to release me or kill me? I mean, just no fear.
Right.
No fear. And you think of Peter, who was so fearful he could not be at the crucifixion, then saying, well,
Right.
do it or don't you?
Right. You say when he was talking to Peter, this was not going as Quintis had hoped. Everything Peter said confirmed what he had heard from the others. All the testimony pointed in the same direction. The carpenter was dead, and when he was placed in the tomb, it would take a number of persons to roll back the stone. Guards were on duty, under torch, and even when they were being put to death, they repeated the same story, that Jesus had walked out of the tomb. It was either a case of mass hysteria or in reality the true resurrection of Jesus, the carpenter of Nazareth.
That's right. That's it. That's it. And another important aspect of this is the manner in which the multiple languages, the speaking of tongues,
Right.
it all adds up to the fact that something significant happened. And this gradually permeated into the mind of Quintis to where he agreed with all of the evidence that Jesus was really a very forceful person, had done a great deal of good, that the miracles were for real, and that the resurrection occurred, and a miracle occurred after the resurrection, which he went and verified for himself. That was the story of the fishes.
Now, when he goes and he actually talks to, and again, you kept Pontius Pilate towards the end because he kind of fills in, and in a sense it's interesting because you set it up that, in a sense, Quintis doesn't show his hand. Pilate wants to know, well, what did you find out? And Quintis kind of plays it close to the vest because he wants to hear Pilate's version to see how it fit, right?
That's right. In fact, there are 2 great scenes that I think of scenes because in my mind this really was a play I was writing. It was a passion play in a sense, trying to bring to life these people because they were real people, and how they were manipulated, how they acted. Was the great scene with Pontius Pilate and Quintis, where Quintis pounds a table and says, "You're a Roman, govern." And you haven't governed, you haven't fulfilled your task, and he walks out.
Right.
That to me was sort of the epitome of the fact that Pontius Pilate was a dismal failure as a governor and had allowed himself to be manipulated by Caiaphas. The other great part of the book is the chapter 9, the interview with Mary. And that's a difficult thing to write. How do you write an interview with the Blessed Virgin? And it's rather easy to do because all you do is you put yourself in the position of, you pose the questions and you know from her character how she would answer.
Right.
And to my mind, one of the great answers is that when she was sort of accused of fomenting or creating this story as a fiction where
Right, about the angel.
really
and
raped,
everything, right.
she laughed.
Right.
She laughed.
Right.
And how, think of the good that was done. Think of all of this and all of the criticism. And of course it's not true.
Right. When they went to see her, they searched for, and you used the name Miriam right here.
That's because that's the Aramaic version of Mary.
You say, decided to search accompanied by Longinus and Marcus. He further decided not to dress in uniform, but wear clothes as if native. Why did you decide to make that point in the book?
Because then he was a member of the community. He wasn't a Roman general wandering around, so he could listen to the people. And since he had served previously, he did speak a certain amount of Aramaic and understood it, and understood a certain amount of Hebrew. So Quintis was a pretty educated person.
Now she says, I know Tiberius sent you to find the truth. Her voice once again reminded him of a gently flowing brook. You were wrong to crucify Jesus, but you are forgiven. She smiled and added, his death fulfilled the prophecies.
Yep.
Now, how did she know who he was? Because she had heard about it, or she had a special insight?
Well, you have to sort of imply something. If you were the mother of God, if you are raising Jesus, who is this divine human person, then certainly you are not doing this in total ignorance. So I'm going to assume that there are certain powers. I'm also assuming that Jesus appeared to her first, before anyone else, but not at the tomb.
Which has been a popular belief.
That's right.
It's not a teaching of the church, but a popular
Yeah, there are certain things you have to assume. If it's all deductive reasoning. If A and equals B and B equals C, then A equals B.
Right.
So with that deductive reasoning, I did imply certain things, but based not on fiction, not on some wild whim, but on a basis of pure logic that something happened.
Right.
And
she says to him, but you can see him, my son. He beckons. Quintus, follow him. And you say Quintus was not sure what she meant.
Well, this sets the stage for, and Tiberius too is wondering if Quintus is becoming a Christian.
Right, you say that at the end. What's going on there?
So then I remember I said that there were two, in my mind when I started writing this, two great miracles. One, the resurrection, and the other, the fact that the church survived and existed, and Christianity existed. So I've set the stage in a sense for a follow-up, and maybe if I
So kind of like the early church kind of a thing?
I think there's quite a story to be told, and I started doing some research in it. Just one basic question: why did Peter go to Rome? Right. There's nothing in any of the scriptures that says that Peter went to Rome. Nothing. And yet, I said to a Jesuit friend of mine, how do we know Peter went to Rome? And he said, well, we don't know if he went there or not, but he was killed and buried there. So, this is quite a story. If you start.
Right. Well, let me ask you, your scientific background, you just alluded to it with saying through logic. I think people would say, well, what does science have to do with faith anyway? I mean, it's this, how are they related? And how does a man of reason like you believe this stuff?
First of all, I don't think there's any difficulty whatsoever, any conflict between science and religion and theology. As a matter of fact, I'm a scientist. Very precise scientist, because if you're going to get a rocket up into space, you have to be 100% correct. And perfection, as we know, doesn't exist in life, but you better be pretty close to perfect or it's not going to happen. Somebody's going to get killed. All right, with all of that, I'm saying there is more precision, there is more proof in theology than there is in science, which may startle you. But let's take some of the basic tenets of science: light, electricity. We know how they work, but we don't know what they are. So we invent theories that will fit in terms of what they do. So in order to explain electricity, we have to invent something that doesn't exist, the square root of -1. And that is implicit in the equations to describe electricity, but it doesn't exist. So we are creating models to explain what we can't explain.
We don't really understand.
That's right. So you take light. Does it act as particles or does it act as a wave?
Right.
So we invent a quantum theory, which says it acts either way depending upon how we set the marbles.
Right.
But we don't know.
Right.
So we invent all of these things in science.
And in some ways, in a simple way, I think, well, if you go back and you read the early church and read now, it's the same story. But yet, if you go back 100 years, 150 years, even in science, what people believed then.
That's the point. There's more faith in science.
Right.
You have great faith when you flip a switch that the lights will go on. But how do you know the lights are going to go on?
Right.
That's faith.
Right.
All right? And so the very people that
How
would
do you
say,
know those guys on the moon you saw on TV were really on the moon? Right?
well, that's another thing. There are a vast number of people believe it was all a fake, but that's ridiculous because you can track the vehicle going all the way to the moon.
Right.
And our great enemies would certainly love to say that we faked
Let me
it.
ask you one question just before we go. What chapter did you enjoy the most writing?
9, the chapter, the interview with the Blessed Virgin.
Okay. And is that the one you think people will find the most interesting, or is there another one you would think was the most interesting?
The interview with Pontius Pilate, I think, is very interesting, where the second interview, where the whole concept of leadership, the whole concept of the stature of a job, the importance of a job, the morality of how you behave, being in a position of leadership.
Right. I noticed that too. Right at the beginning of the book, you talk about Quintis,
Right.
and you talk about him being a born leader, basically.
Right.
So the concept of leadership is very important to you in this book.
It means that you take the responsibility and you perform to the best of your ability, not to what is best for you as a person, but best for the job, because you have a moral obligation to perform. And leadership is not only to set the stage of what is to be done, but also to know enough to get the people to follow. So leadership is both setting the pace and getting people to follow. And not everybody has that ability.
Right.
And not everybody in a position of leadership exercises that moral responsibility. And that's a great problem.
Right. Well, thank you so much for finding the time to put this book together and stop
thank
by
you.
and seeing us here, Doctor.
Enjoyed it.
Speaking with Dr. Rocco Martino about his book, The Resurrection, a criminal investigation of the mysterious disappearance of the body of the crucified criminal, Jesus of Nazareth. You should check it out. It's published by Blue Nose Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Very interesting story. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.